Good evening, friends. The nights are growing colder. The pumpkins are glowing brighter, and Halloween is almost here. You can feel it in the air, that mix of chill and mystery that makes October so wonderfully strange. So pull up a blanket, pour yourself a warm drink, and settle in close to the radio. Tonight's tale is one of two boys, a walk through the woods, and a night they'll never forget. This story is called The Ghosts in the Graveyard. The air had that unmistakable October feel, the smell of burning leaves, the hush of shorter days, and the faint thrill that Halloween was right around the corner. Radios all over town were buzzing with spooky tunes, shop windows glowed orange with paper pumpkins, and even the street lights seemed to flicker a little dimmer, as if to set the mood for mischief. On one of those cool, golden afternoons, two boys, Benny and Hank, left school with more energy than sense. They were best friends, 13 years old, and full of the kind of confidence that only comes when the world still feels like a playground. Benny, the taller of the two, had packed his uncle's old canvas tent in his knapsack just in case, while Hank brought a map of the county and a canteen. They planned to take the long way home, wandering through the woods that bordered the far side of town, the kind of woods that every kid knew about, but not many had explored. The trail started out wide and friendly, leaves crunched beneath their sneakers, and sunlight filtered through branches like golden lace. They threw rocks at tree trunks, talked about Halloween costumes, and argued about whether the haunted house at the fair was really haunted this year. Time slipped by the way it does when boys are too busy laughing to notice. Eventually the shadows grew longer. The light softened to that deep orange that only October can make, and the wind began to hum quietly through the trees. Hank glanced up at the sky. "We should probably head back," he said. Benny looked around, trying to spot where the trail had gone, but the trees all looked the same now. "We're fine," Benny said, forcing a grin. "If we can't find the trail, we'll just camp. I brought the tent, remember?" Hank didn't argue, but he didn't look convinced either. The woods seemed thicker now, darker. The last bits of daylight were fading fast, and every tree looked like it was leaning just a little closer. Then, ahead of them, the ground began to rise, and as they climbed the slope, they saw it, a clearing. In the middle of the woods, open and still, surrounded by a crooked iron fence. Inside, stones, dozens of them, poked up from the ground like teeth. A graveyard. Neither of them said a word at first. There was an old lamp at the center of it, the kind you'd expect to see outside a farmhouse, burning with a faint yellow glow. It shouldn't have been working. There were no wires, no houses for miles, but there it was, flickering like a heartbeat. Benny tried to sound brave. "Well, at least there's light." Hank's voice was smaller. "You want to camp here? You got a better idea?" Benny asked, trying to laugh. He didn't, so they picked a spot near the lamp, just a few steps from the nearest gravestone, and began setting up the tent. Their fingers were stiff from the cold, and every sound seemed louder than it should have been. The snap of a twig, the rustle of dry grass, the creak of the iron fence when the wind brushed past it. As they worked, the woods behind them seemed to shift. Branches cracked in the distance, steady and deliberate, not like an animal, but like footsteps. The boys froze. Then Hank forced a chuckle. "Probably a deer," he said. But he didn't sound convinced. They worked faster. The air had turned colder now, sharp enough to make their breath fog. By the time the tent was up, night had swallowed the clearing. The only light left came from that lonely old lamp. Inside, the tent felt smaller than Benny remembered. They huddled close, wrapped in their jackets, pretending to be tired. Outside, the woods whispered and sighed, and somewhere far off, a low moaning sound rose through the trees. It didn't sound like the wind. For a long time, they lay in silence, counting their breaths. Then it came, soft at first, a faint crack of a branch, another, closer, then the sound of something dragging across the ground. Benny sat up. "You hear that?" Hank nodded. Neither of them moved. The sound stopped for a moment, and then came something worse, the lightest press of a hand against the outside of the tent. Just a slow, careful touch, like someone tracing their fingers along the canvas. Benny's heart stopped. The imprint of fingers pressed through the fabric, clear as day, 5 long shapes moving slowly downward. Then they vanished. Hank whispered, "What was that?" "I don't know," Benny said, his voice barely more than air. The hand came back, then another, one on the roof, one near the back. The boys clutched each other, frozen. It was as if unseen visitors were circling their tent, curious, patient. Outside, the moaning grew louder. Now it was joined by faint whispers. Words that didn't make sense, like voices underwater. The lamp flickered. For hours, the sounds came and went. Footsteps, whispers, hands pressing gently on the tent, like ghosts testing a barrier. The boys didn't dare unzip the flap. They just sat there, knees to their chests, waiting for morning. But finally, sometime after midnight, Benny couldn't take it anymore. He had to know. He reached for the zipper and pulled it down an inch. Cold air swept in. Then he peered out. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks. The lamp's yellow light shimmered through a thin veil of fog, and in that glow, shapes were moving. Pale, thin, and impossible. Figures drifted among the gravestones. Not solid, but not invisible either. Some looked like shadows given form, others like bones wrapped in smoke. Skeletons walked silently between the stones, their movements slow and solemn. One of them stopped, turned toward the tent, and raised a hand. Benny ducked back inside and yanked the zipper shut. "They're out there," he gasped. "They're walking around." Hank's eyes widened. "Let me see." "Don't!" Benny hissed. But Hank couldn't help himself. With trembling fingers, he pulled the zipper down just enough to peek through. The fog glowed faintly in the lamplight, and there it was, a skeleton standing only yards away, facing the tent. It didn't move, but Hank knew it saw them. He jerked the zipper back up. "It's looking right at us," he whispered. Then came the footsteps, a slow, steady crunch of grass. One step, then another, each one dragging just a little, like a bare bone scraping the ground. The sound moved closer. The boys pressed their backs to the far side of the tent, clutching their knees, not daring to breathe. The sound of the footsteps stopped just outside. Then came a hollow, rattling breath, like air moving through empty ribs. And then they saw it. The lamplight in the graveyard behind cast its shadow onto the tent wall. A skull, a spine, long fingers hanging at its sides. The shape loomed motionless. Benny's breath tightened in his chest. Hank didn't dare move. The rattling breath came again, closer this time, and for a terrible moment the shadow leaned forward, as if the figure outside were bending toward them, listening. Then, slowly, it straightened. Finally, the shadow shifted. The crunching started again as the figure moved back away from the tent and faded back into the graveyard until only silence remained. Neither boy spoke after that. They sat in silence, wide awake until the black sky slowly lightened to gray. The noises faded. The moans stopped. The lamp still burned, but it was weak now, paling against the morning light. When they finally dared to unzip the tent again, the graveyard looked normal. The stones were still, the fog had lifted, and the woods seemed brighter, friendlier, like the night had been a bad dream. The boys packed up in silence. They didn't talk about what they saw, not then. But as they started back toward town, Benny glanced over his shoulder one last time. The lamp still glowed faintly in the daylight, stubborn and strange. They made it home by late morning, cold, exhausted, and forever changed. Their parents scolded them for staying out all night, but neither boy said where they'd been. Who would believe them anyway? Years later, long after they'd grown up, Benny swore he could still see that lamp when he closed his eyes. And sometimes, when the October wind blew just right, he could almost hear that low, hollow moan. So, dear listener, as Halloween creeps near and the nights grow long, remember this little story of two boys who learned that some lights in the woods are best left alone. And if you ever find yourself walking home after dark and you see a glow through the trees, steady, golden, and waiting, think twice before you step closer. It might just be that same old lamp still burning for whoever dares to find it next.